welcome to the Monday, March the 11th, regular board meeting of the Sewer Authority Midcoast. Can I have roll call, please?
Director Reddick,
Here.
Director Blanchard,
Here.
Director Dye,
Here.
Director Penrose,
Here.
Director Sager Carter,
Present.
and Director Lohman.
Here.
Is there any public comment?
On April 13th, coming up, is the next in the series of annual Coastside Wildflower Days. This year, they're being combined with Earth Day at the same time. There's all going to be everything from contests to kids' activities, adult activities, plants fixing, and all kinds of everything.
What's the date again?
April 13th, Saturday, about 10 to 4. And some of the ladies are going to get in touch with you folks. We have some speaker openings. Somebody from the council wants to talk for a few minutes during the announcement part of that. June will probably be contacting you two.
Okay, or Harvey.
Or Harvey. No, I mean, they just know you, so they're going to contact
Yeah.
you and ask.
Well,
Is it
I'm not
June
gonna-
Baxter
I'll
you're
be
talking?
right after surgery, so I'm not gonna wanna do it.
Is it June Baxter?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, she can talk to
And
her.
she knows you, and she said she's going to talk to you. That's it. Oh,
Good.
the theme is climate resiliency.
We move on to the consent agenda. Does anybody want anything pulled?
Yeah, I think it was, I think the minutes. Please.
Anything else on the consent agenda for being pulled? Okay, can I have a vote to pass the items 3B and 3C?
So move.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 We move back to 3A then.
Yeah, so I would like to see, I'd like us to hold the minutes, and I wanna see a verbatim of, John Szabo's remarks from the meeting. I think the summary's not accurate, and so I'd like to see the verbatim.
It's not that it's so much it's it's inaccurate, it just, it kind of doesn't convey the point in appropriate language, what he was trying to make. I mean, he was trying to make a valid point, but I feel as if this,
But he was talking about private laterals and not the system, so I'd like to see it verbatim. So
Can we do that then?
That's continued.
It's the board's set of minutes, so if that's what the board wants, then we'll do
Okay.
that.
Good. We'll move on to item 4A. Authorize the general manager to issue a purchase order with Calcon Systems to rewire the electrical for the fire control panel in an amount not to exceed $88,220.
So as mentioned in a previous meeting, this is one of those projects that just continues to bless us with surprises as we are going through it. So what was a simple replacement of a failed panel has turned into a fairly significant sized project. Obviously, in order to replace the panel, we had to have an inspection by the fire department. The fire department then, of course, informed us of all of the areas which were not up to code, which we've been working on. And then now we've found out that the electrical has to be upgraded in order to meet the requirements. So, and during all this time, it's, our fire panel continues to not be satisfactory. We end up having false alarms. We've had, I don't know how many in the last month, several I know of. 2 or 3 that I'm aware of. It may have been more than that. The fire department is less than happy with us. And we're doing everything we can, but unfortunately, every time we seem to take a step in the project, we end up having to go somewhere else, and this is the latest. If you'd like specifics, Kishan would be more than happy to explain to you the specifics of this electrical work.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with the specifics, but I do have a lot of problems understanding the different proposals. They all seem to be talking about something completely different from one another. I can't interpret that. And I'm wondering if we have the original RFP that went out to explain what the questions were that they were supposed to respond to, because I don't get it.
Well, what we did was, and I know Director Reddick had requested this, and we can certainly provide this to all of the board members. We had the diagram of what needed to be done, and I'll let Kishan explain the oddities of the responses that we received.
Yeah, just to give you a gist of it, the existing fire control system was designed and manufactured by Simplex Granelli. So we approached Simplex to revamp the entire system a couple of months back. And Simplex Granelli then passed it on to their parent company, which is Johnson Controls. So they modified the design in the form of plans, the entire fire control system, and submitted it to the fire department. The fire department took a while to review the plans, and finally the plans were approved. And then we had a site inspection along with Johnson Controls and the fire department, and a couple of changes were brought about in the plans to bring it to the present code. And then we were required to order all the parts which go into the system, the fire control system, various smoke detectors and various sensors and all. So we went ahead and ordered it, and we were ready to install it. At that time, Johnson Controls told us that their responsibility is only for doing the programming and overseeing the installation. They will not be doing any electrical wiring of the various parts which go into the system. And therefore, we had to reach out to an electrical contractor. So we had the plans in place, which runs to about 10, 11 pages, which explains clearly what all is required. And a gist of it was distributed via email to all the contenders, which clearly mentioned that what is the scope, saying we need to install new wires to properly communicate the devices, and these are all being explained in the plans. And the design has to be done in conjunction with the code, which has been also specified in the plans. And the scope requires to remove the existing control system and then install it, startup and testing also to be included, as well as the new wiring needs to be done. So this is the gist of the email which was sent out to all the contenders. So we sent it to about, first we approached Walshawn Fire Protection, because these people are also involved in the sprinkler system which is existing in the plant. And we thought the best would be to go to Walshawn, because they would take care of the entire fire system. But then they got back to us saying that we do not do the electricals, we do only the sprinkler part of it, but we can give you a rough estimate about how much it's going to cost if we were to go to a third-party electrical contractor whom they can hire. So that's why you have one quotation from Walshawn, which is like a rough order magnitude. And then we thought, since now we have the plans which have been seen by the fire department, although they said that you can submit the as-built plans, we're not going to stamp it right now, but informally they looked at it and they said everything has been taken care of. So we went with these plans to a couple of contenders. We went to the subcontractor from Walshawn, and Walshawn subcontractor, which is our fire protection, refused to bid for it. They said that we would not like to bid for a system which is designed and which will be programmed by Johnson Controls, because we make our own system. It'll be voiding the warranty. So we can supply you a total system with our own parts, for which we said no, because we had already procured the parts and we had already completed the design. So that is one company, one contractor where I mentioned in the staff report, or fire protection, who refused to bid for it. So we contacted Tesco Controls, who is also a noted electrical contractor in this field, Calcon, and Cupertino Electric. So Tesco refused for the same reason. They said they do not have the expertise. So we ended up with Calcon and Cupertino Electric and a rough estimate from Walshawn. So that, and if you look at the proposals, all of them indicate the same, whereas Walshawn has got a sprinkler system also added in it. That's why it's a little confusing, it's got sprinkler system. We do not want to take up the sprinkler system right now. That is a separate thing. To bring it to code, we first would like to get the electrical work done for all the parts which have been procured from Johnson Controls and connected by means of electrical wires. So if you look at Calcon and Cupertino Electric, these two are just apples to apples because the plans have been reviewed by both of them, and we also offered to Cupertino Electric if they needed any clarifications for job site work, they are welcome, but they said everything is clear, we don't need anything, the plans are very much clear. So that's why we have 3 quotations which are attached to the staff report, and the staff is recommending that we award the contract to Calcon, which is the lowest, because Calcon is at 88 and Cupertino Electric was about 108 or whatever. And yeah, Cupertino Electric 112, and just to give an idea about how the quotation was, I've given the rough order estimate from Walshawn Fire Protection, which is 92,000
Without the sprinklers.
without the sprinkler. I have highlighted that, maybe that didn't show up in the,
That's not an actual bid.
pardon me?
That
Yeah, it's a rough order of magnitude because they were not willing to, subsequent to that, when we sent the plans, they said they wouldn't like to do it. They would like to do it only if we give them the sprinkler and everything included. At the same time, they said that they can pass it on to they can definitely pass it on to the third party contractor. So when we contacted our fire protection, who is their sub, he refused to bid for something which is designed by their competitor.
And the problem is that the fire department has expressed concern that we continue to have these false alarms, and they want us to resolve it as quickly as possible, which is interesting because a significant amount of delay in this was actually waiting for them to do the inspection and tell us what it was that we needed to do to get everything up to code per their inspection. So, but in the meantime, we have 2 options, which really is only one option, and that is to continue to have our system function the way that it does, and have the risk of these false alarms that they respond to.
So the design and the parts were purchased before we went out to do the wiring because we didn't know we had to do the wiring?
That's correct. This project has continued to creep into various components, and at that time, we were not aware.
Yeah, if I could clarify, the design involves wiring using these components. So the design is made by Johnson Controls. All these plans which have been sent out for bid is drawn by Johnson Controls. So they've done the design, they've drawn the plans using their components.
But we didn't understand that we'd have to do anything with those plans except plug the parts in. I mean, I'm not sure why it went from that into these new proposals to connect everything.
Yeah, that's because
That's,
we thought Johnson Controls will take up the complete work of supplying the parts as well as wiring, installing everything as a system.
but that would have been a $90,000 job, right? I mean, if we were talking about doing design, buying the parts, installing the parts, you were under the impression that you could do that for a lot less than this?
No, it wasn't the money. It was, we didn't anticipate that we would have to go out and get a separate vendor for the electrical. We thought we would be getting a quote from Johnson on the electrical component because it's their components.
But then if you got that quote from, let's say they did give us a quote on it and said they would do it, you'd still have to send out other RFPs.
No, they sent us a quote only for the parts.
That was specifically what we requested
Yeah.
at that time.
There are a number of parts, like about 15 detectors, couple of relays, couple of breakers, a lot of things in the system which go into these plants. So they sent us a quotation only for that, and those were long lead items which we went ahead and procured the parts. So now we have all the parts, those have to be wired together. At that moment, Johnson Controls said that they will not be doing the wiring because they do not have any electrical expertise with them. So they wanted us to take up the electrical work.
It just seems to me like maybe the scope of the project should have been understood at the beginning. This process is not transparent to the public at all. And our purchasing policy says over $30,000, we will, issue RFPs. And I don't consider a schematic of the project an RFP. We have to treat these things as public documents. The public needs to understand what it is we're funding. So, I mean, I think if we pre-qualify people, if we understand the project and then pre-qualify people, then we don't get into this situation of, so well, we're only gonna do this part. So, and the law basically says you're not supposed to break up projects into smaller pieces, because that's, not transparent. So, going forward, I think we should, understand the scope of these things in advance and have documents, I don't know if it's a standard RFP or an RFQ, that we treat as a public document the public can understand as well as engineering nerds, right? So, I totally support spending the money to fix the problem, but I think we need to work on the process. When we're spending this kind of money, it needs to be transparent and accessible by the public. That's all I wanted to say about that, so.
And I completely agree, and as Kish and I have both mentioned, at each stage of this project, the project itself was going to be a simple replacement. It was only after the fire department inspection where they didn't just look at the panel inspection, they inspected the entire plant and gave us a huge laundry list. That was when, at that point, we knew the broader scope of the project, but we were already in the middle of, we were already implementing some portions of the
With
project.
Johnson Controls?
Because we were already trying to solve the panel issue. We weren't anticipating at that time anything beyond fixing that problem. And then suddenly it was, and now you have to install all these sprinkler systems and you have to do all of these other issues, which we were already in the project at that time. So granted, in the future, should something like that happen, yes, we would not have taken it piece by piece. It was never our intent to bite it off in smaller pieces. That's how it's been presented to us. So we try to avoid that because it doesn't make our life any easier either.
So are there some other systems here that we need to be thinking ahead as to, making replacements and doing the entire system rather than just a part of it?
Yes, and much of that is identified in both the 5 and 20-year plan. This was a failed piece of equipment that we needed to replace. Our expectation was we were replacing a piece of equipment, not an entire system. And
So-
that's what caused the problem.
Consequence of just waiting till things fail and then reacting, yeah.
Yeah, and completely that was the issue, is after numerous false alarms, the only way, we've contacted the company and tried to resolve it. Is it, something that can be repaired? Is it something that can be, so we understood it to just replace the panel. And the panel was the issue. And it wasn't until we had to get the permit and the inspection that suddenly, of course, that opened up the entire envelope.
I know about that process.
Yes, and then like I said, it's the project that's continuing to give us more gifts.
So what is the total cost of this project, of all of the pieces from the initial failure to date?
Do you have an,
And what is the anticipated rest of the costs?
I don't have it.
we can bring that back
Bring it back.
at a future meeting, because there, obviously with the sprinkler system and everything else that has to go into this, which we are building into the budget for next year. Obviously, it wasn't planned because, like I said, we were expecting to only replace the one piece of equipment for this year. So we can bring that back at the next meeting and give you the report on what our estimate is for to complete the final project. But the other alternative is we don't have a fire system.
And
So
was this
that's,
identified in the 5-year CIP?
but
Not,
With-
not this year, I mean, it wasn't on priority because it was working fine and there were only some parts need to be replaced, we didn't realize that they will fall apart the way it's been happening.
And so with replacing the sprinkler system, we're going to have a fire department involved again. Are we working with them now so we know everything that's going to be required ahead of time?
Yes, in fact, we worked with them and that's how these plans were generated. We had submitted a first set of plans, rather Johnson Controls had submitted a first set of plans, and then they had come onto the site, they did a site inspection and recommended changes, after which we have revised these. So they were confident, the fire department was confident, they said you don't have to submit it back to us, just submit us as-built drawings and that should be fine. So our task is, once we get it installed, we're gonna call them again to make sure that,
I'm concerned about the as-built drawings. My concern is, I have seen with other fire departments that you give them the as-built and they have this little checklist and they go, oops, you're missing this part. Do we have a checklist of what they're going to be looking for
They
in the
gave us the
as-built?
list of everything that we had to have to get it to code. So
Okay.
we have that. That's not the issue, it's just we didn't, at the time that we planned to replace the panel, we anticipated it was just the panel.
So the problem came with the change in the company, in the way the companies work too. And since it was done, and it sounds like there is different components and nobody, for whatever reason, I have my suspicions, wants to touch anybody else's work.
And that's what happens when you have a system that is proprietary, is typically it's difficult to get someone else to do the work. They generally have their subs that they like to work with, and in this particular case, it's not an issue. I mean, it's electrical work. The problem is finding an electrician or an electrical company that will come out and do the work that doesn't already sub for someone who they consider as a competitor.
So is this going to be a proprietary system that we're putting together?
All of the systems, when you purchase them, are proprietary. When you put in a system.
But we're having a combination of proprietary systems, and I'm afraid we're getting a one-off system.
No, they're all, it's all the same company. It's just they do, the one thing they don't do is the electrical, which is,
I see.
yeah. And Walshan subs to someone who can do the electrical, but they're the ones that are in competition with Johnson.
Johnson.
With Johnson, okay.
So that's why, if we could, wave the magic wand and go back and say, okay, we're gonna be looking at an entire fire system replacement, we would have done it that way. We would have had it designed, we would have gone out for bid on the entire thing. We thought it was a part. So unfortunately, that was a misunderstanding of what was going to be needed to make that system work. And then, once the fire department started looking at everything, not just that particular component, that changed the whole scope of the project for us, not because it needs to be replaced, it's to bring it up to code.
And the fire sprinkler system that we have is adequate, does not need replacing or fixing.
No, it doesn't meet code. That's
Needs
why we have
replacing.
to add that too.
And why wasn't that folded in at this time?
I don't think we have the quotes on it yet,
no,
no.
because, yeah, they have to be brought from a different company, a different,
But we do have it with Walshan.
Well, we have an estimate of what that will be. We haven't gone out and said,
They've got 15 plus 28, and if you subtract that from their total of, what is it?
yeah,
152 or something, I don't know,
yeah, not all of it is required. Walshan has just given us an estimate, so we don't need everywhere, we just need to comply with code for the sprinkler part of it, which Walshan has subsequently done an inspection for us, because they do our annual maintenance, have recommended some changes, and we have already incorporated those. So we don't need to revamp the sprinkler system at all.
oh, okay, it's already been done,
Yeah, it's already been done in parts, they've recommended certain changes in their annual inspection, and we have incorporated, they've actually signed off on those.
Okay.
So are all these pieces gonna be able to talk to each other
Yes.
and function?
Yes,
Without some proprietary code?
that is not a problem.
I asked Keisha a question that I think the board might wanna hear. I asked, is it the fire district or the fire department that has signed off on the sprinklers?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't wanna have a side conversation,
we
because
don't-
you're the people that need to know that.
We don't have, but I've got I thought I heard that the sprinkler system is in the budget for next year.
I'm sorry, that was my mistake. It's, the remaining portion of the project is budgeted in this next fiscal year. We had anticipated.
Wait, what is the remaining portion? Can you, I don't understand what, we're being asked to vote on this.
So I'm incorrect in my notes. It says sprinkler system is in the budget for next year. There is a remaining part of this project that is in the budget for next year.
That is correct.
And how much is that?
That's the part we need to bring back to you that we don't have, but no matter what, we have to do this, because otherwise we do not have a working fire system. So we've got, and the reason why we had pushed it until next year was because we had already done a mid-year budget request to do the emergency work that absolutely had to be done this year. There's additional work, but we wanted to, plan and budget for it because it wasn't as, my understanding, as urgent as this piece. We've got to get the panel replaced.
I would like to see all the parts of this from day one where it went, I'm trying to try, to all the way through the budget for next year in pieces, so it's
Okay.
broken out at our next meeting. I'm
We
curious
can,
about
we can
that.
bring that.
Presented as a project, all
Yes.
the project components.
Yes,
And their associated costs.
yes,
Yeah.
we will provide that.
I have
Thank
one,
Oh, go ahead.
so we're talking about all the electrical that's been identified as potentially at risk from sea level rise and saltwater intrusion and wind-driven waves and all that thing, is that it?
Well, that was done in 2013, and we have not revisited that. That was something that this board had directed, but through the transition of managers, it never moved forward. And then when we presented it, when I first got here and I talked with the member agencies, there was some disagreement about the sense of urgency on that as a project and its dollar cost versus, excuse me, some of the other projects, like some of the IPS work. And it continues to be, I would say, less sense of urgency, to be a little more blunt about it. You wanna prevent the spills first. So anything that's got a potential for that continues to be the focus. And so I think definitely as part of this next 5-year CIP discussion, we need to go back and revisit that analysis. But this particular project is specifically related to just that, the fire system replacement.
Right, so I'm just talking about, as we make these investments, I think we have to understand, the bigger picture. If
Yes.
we're gonna be needing to make, or start planning for some radical changes to our footprint,
Yes.
we wanna start looking at all this together somehow.
Yes.
And,
Yes, and I think that the next 5-year discussion is a good opportunity to have that, to bring that back. Because the 3 different agencies were not looking at it from the same sense of urgency, from that analysis that was done. And, I'm not sure if that's on the website, but we can make sure that we, is it?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. We can make sure that we put that analysis out there, for the board members who weren't here back then when that was done.
So I know that the county has done a sort of a general
Mhm.
vulnerability assessment. But, I think we need to start thinking about doing a site-specific assessment and getting that on our radar. It's part of that plan, but.
Yes, and once again, I think that's, an important discussion for this board, because I will say, and Kishan can certainly lend his opinion on this as well, that each of the member agencies does not view planning and analysis in the same way as maybe one or more of the other agencies. And so we get into that, wanting to put dollars into projects.
People hate to spend money on planning, but.
Yeah, and so I think this 5-year discussion that we're gonna be having in the next few months is a great opportunity to go back and revisit that and some of the other analyses that have been done to see where this board wants those types of projects to be scheduled or considered.
Okay.
But in the meantime, unfortunately, we continue to have these projects of urgency versus planning, which is not, just for those of you who don't know, operators love to plan. They don't like emergencies. This makes them very uncomfortable. Yeah.
One more question. So you have the specs on the sprinkler system, but you haven't gone out to bid on that part of it yet?
Well, there's some other components too, so
Well, that was my question. Is there more after that as part of this project that's going to be coming along?
and that's what Kishan was saying, we can put that together and present that to you. What we've been trying to do is solve the original problem, which is the fire panel and the false alarms, because the fire department is less than thrilled at the numerous times they've had to respond to false alarms. So, and for us, that doesn't help because we have to assume it's a fire. We have to respond as well. That's our core issue, is to resolve that. Then there's the remainder of it, which is everything else that they want us to do to get our facility up to code. I don't wanna misspeak and tell you what those components are, but I do know there are additional components.
That's a red flag.
Yeah, and, I mean, I understand that the false alarms were a problem and it made you wanna replace the panel, but I would think that as part of that, you'd be thinking, what else is part of this system, instead of just like, oh no, we have to do this piece, oh no. I mean, I know what it's like when you're doing a project at your house and your contractor, you know, you go to a building and they say, oh yeah, you gotta do this, and you're going, what? That happens to everybody and ordinary people, but in this case, I think we're all supportive of a good fire prevention system or alarm system here and whatever components, but let's try to think about the whole system and
Well-
not just part by part. Oh, and then we have to do this, and then we have to do this.
Well, and we had not thought of it that way. We had looked at it as, in the 5-year, we know we're going to have to do this. We're planning to do this,
To
getting
do which, the panel or the whole system?
the system.
Ah, okay.
But the panel failed.
Right.
So that brought it into the sense of urgency.
Okay.
We thought we
That
could
makes
replace the panel and then at some point look at the entire system. Fire department came in to do their inspection and said, no, you can't just replace the panel, you have to get everything up to code.
So
That was the surprise.
So it was a surprise that you weren't up to code, sorry.
I was gonna say, this is all at the behest, because it was working just fine, but it has to do with that little bit of what is up to code, and instead of just letting you fix it and get it up to code within 5 years. Now, do we know what other things in the plant are not up to code? Not only fire department, but
We have not had a full system analysis to identify everything that's not up to code or everything that if we were to do some work would need to be brought up to code. That's a full master plan. And if you remember 3 years ago, I requested funds to do that. And once again, that goes back to, not everybody likes to do assessments. There was a
kinda critical,
definite push to get projects,
Don't you think?
pipe in the ground, equipment replaced.
That's what we had to do, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So-
and so we would love to do a full system master plan, but that would take a cost that was not supported by all 3 of the member agencies that would have to support that. And so that unfortunately leaves us in a position of going forward with projects that we have identified, that we are aware of, but then we're going to have these systems that potentially fail earlier because we know many of them are past their useful life. We're doing the best we can. It does feel a bit like whack-a-mole. Staff doesn't like it. I know the member agency managers don't like it, no engineer worth anything would like it, but we've only got so much bandwidth and funding
I
to
think
do these
this
projects.
board would like to look at the cost of a master plan.
Well, I think it all depends on the outcome of the lawsuit.
And that's what we heard when I brought it up a couple years ago as part of the strategic plan. That was the impetus behind the 5-year CIP and then expanding it out to a 20-year, was that the hope was that that would be resolved somewhere in there and then we could go forward, and it's just taken longer. But we do have an idea on that 20-year, but we have not had that level of analysis done because we would have to have an outside engineering firm do that, and that's funding.
So, don't we now have an asset management software program package?
We are still in the implementation. Unfortunately, this software company was purchased in the middle of our implementation. So it's a little bit of a delay we had not planned on.
The reason I brought it up is that's sort of if we're
Yes.
inputting, the status of all our component parts, that should,
Yes.
feed into a master plan pretty quickly and reasonably, at a reasonable price.
But it's not going to tell you what components need to be brought up to code. And that's
Right.
that's the component that I fear is going to be, that's going to take more analysis from an outside expert.
But I mean, that's a start though.
Yes,
That you at least
no.
understand
Yes.
the age of things,
Yes. And like I said, we have the 20-year that gives us a very good start at that. But what it doesn't do is identify at that level of detail things that might need to be brought up to code. Because obviously we're looking at a more of a 10,000-foot level project. And then we also have, if it's in year 5, we don't know if the code's gonna change between now and when we implement it.
Well, failure to comply with code seems to me to be a pretty serious problem.
Well, we don't wanna do
Uh,
that.
Yeah.
And there are many structures that don't meet code until you go to do your next project.
That's
And
right.
that's when you plan for it. Otherwise, you're continuously chasing your tail to always be up to code.
That's right.
But this is a little bit different from a home remodel though. That's
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and we focus on operation and our permit, guaranteed, that's our primary focus. But when we have a system that fails, then we have to address it. And unfortunately, this particular one, this particular replacement of a component turned into a much larger project than we anticipated.
Code is very different from health and safety issues. Sometimes it has to do with the color of the exit sign over your door, and you're not up to code. And
But that can result in
My-
liability.
Right, and we do have some of that as well.
my experience with the fire district was that they always, and when we had our business, liked to come out and do their annual inspection and give us a gotcha. And it had to do with little things like, oh, we don't like your battery backup anymore, it has to be hardwired. That's the new code. And frankly, it wasn't a liability issue at that point until you do some kind of major work. So, I'm a little surprised that the, local fire department decided to jump in and not just ask for a plan for fixing things and getting everything in order in a more rational sequence.
Well, and unfortunately, that is what caught us a little off guard, was that it wasn't, okay, you can replace this and then here's this list of things you're gonna need to bring up to code. It was, you have to do it all at the same time,
Right.
unfortunately.
Well, it seems the plan should be up to code.
Yes, but it would take more than we have the ability to get in a short time frame to get everything up to where it should be. So that's where we have to plan for it and address it
Yeah, you
based
have to
on the
manage
risk
it.
factors,
Well,
yes.
For our next,
For instance, most houses on the coast are not up to code because we don't all have fire sprinklers in our ceilings. And so you need to be very precise when you're talking about the term code, because there are things that have been put in for whatever reason, and, into the building and safety codes, and yet the plant will be perfectly safe and adequately serviceable. And that's
What about
I
a
was-
situation where you have a spill and maybe a contributing factor was something that wasn't up to code?
Well, certainly holes in the pipes and not getting them fixed when they should have been a while back is one of those issues.
Well, and just, I mean, staff, trust me, staff is probably more acutely aware of these issues because they see it every day when they're out doing the work that they do. But there's a certain, like you said, we have to manage it. We can't get, I mean, it would be a full plant redo.
It's part of management of risk.
Right, and so that's where we rely on Kishan and the consulting engineers to help us do the risk assessment of which of these is most urgent. And we have those conversations with the member agency managers and of course, each of them has their own ideas as to which risk is more or less than other risk. And it's up to us to manage it while complying with our permit. So we're trying to do all that, but sometimes it's a system just hits the end of its capability of being MacGyvered. And
Can you bring a follow-up on what additional is gonna be
Yes,
needed to bring
yes.
this into code?
we will gladly bring that at the next meeting.
Are you
Any more
asking for the,
discussion?
are you asking for the entire plant or just this?
No, I was just asking. for
project.
this-
Well, you know,
This system.
This system, I wasn't gonna.
one thing to keep in mind is there is an exemption for facilities that generate, store, treat, and transmit water and wastewater from building ordinances and from zoning ordinances. So when we're talking about what's up to code, the code doesn't necessarily apply if we're talking about building and zoning ordinances, and that's that part of the code. So that's something else. For example, what we would need to do with regard to those facilities, comply with a permit essentially. But that would, and if we're not in compliance with the permit, that would be something that would show up in an inspection report, and we've been dealing with that over
Right.
the past couple of years, but. So that's a little nuance. That means it's not, you know, as terrible as it might sound because of that factor.
But certainly anything that would be a potential risk to health and safety of the employees, of the surrounding area, the environment, obviously, we would never want to do anything that would jeopardize that. So it's a balance.
Okay, more discussion?
Yep.
I'll entertain a motion then.
Move approval. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we move on to 4B, authorize change order number 1 for Portola Pump Station Replacement Pump Project in an amount not to exceed.
So this is a project that was in this year's list of projects, and we have a change order, and I'll let Kishan provide some background on how we got to this change order.
Yes, so we brought this item to the board on January 14th for authorizing general manager to issue a contract with the pump manufacturer. But when we were discussing with the pump manufacturer, he came across, he told us about a certain new design and plus a pedestal type of pump with a new design of the seal, plus he wanted to include spares and startup. And when we added the cost, we realized that he was still the lowest compared to the other three that we had brought last time to the board meeting. And therefore, that's a change order amount about $16,000, so it brings the total cost for this project from this vendor to be about $78,754, while the next lowest, which was brought to the last board meeting, was $95,670. So this vendor is still the lowest, and therefore we'd like to go ahead and include these spares as well as the startup for the pumps.
Okay. Discussion?
I move we authorize change order number 1 for Portola Pump Station Replacement Pump Project in an amount not to exceed $16,000.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we move on to 4C, discuss proposed general budget for fiscal year 2019-20.
You have the document in front of you. The difference from the discussion we had the last time and this time is I have put in that sort of 2.5 million threshold to spread out the IPS repair over a 5-year period rather than, as was recommended by the member agency managers, rather than less this year, more next year, and having too much of a variance. So the primary change from what you've previously seen was that additional approximately $500,000 that we added into the infrastructure division to smooth that over. And the recommendation from the managers was, okay, so even if we don't spend all of that in this first year, it would still be there and available to maybe pick up a little bit of the additional work in the second year and third year, so that way it would smooth it out from a rate perspective. So that's the difference. Obviously, I've highlighted some of the key changes that are in there, and much like last year, explained each of the line items in the budget document so that somebody could look at that and say, okay, that increased by this amount, what's the explanation behind it? And as previously discussed, we do know that, or we anticipate that many of our services and supplies will go up by a CPI. I've estimated it at 4%. We do have some of our suppliers and equipment where we already know it's going to be more than that. So for example, PG&E, the water district, things like that where we already know it's going to be significantly more than CPI, either because of use or because of rate changes or a combination of both. I've tried to, as best as possible, incorporate what is known in there. For ones where we don't know, I've tried to build in based on what we've actually seen as experience this year, like for the chemical supplies, and then put in a CPI escalator. For if we're using more chemicals than we had previously because of different situations, like maybe the flow or the why am I drawing a blank? The strength of what we're processing, then obviously we have to purchase those chemicals to be able to meet our permit. No matter what the cost is, we still have to do that. So we've tried to build that in. As far as the cost for staffing, I put in what we had discussed as the potential for, based on the negotiations, as well as any applicable step increases and what we know for things like the medical and the PERS rates, and that. There is the additional position in there. So other than that, each of the line items is explained. We have looked at some of the smaller projects, and by smaller, things that are less than $30,000, they're really not what I would consider capital projects because they don't extend the useful life of a piece of equipment. They really are just keeping things going by doing some maintenance on them. And we've made sure that we have sufficient funds in the operating budget for those smaller projects that we tend to do either with staff or with small contracts. They aren't the big construction projects that we typically think of.
Yes.
Well, thank you for providing me with a version of this without infrastructure. I find it's really helpful to have administrative services, treatment, and environmental compliance in one document. So I don't know if everybody got that, but I think that's really helpful if she sent it out today.
That was actually the finance committee, because that was the discussion, so I had just sent it out to the three that are on the finance committee.
But I think maybe,
I'd
I
like
would
to
like
see
to
it.
see this in the future, because infrastructure, even though we're planning to keep it steady, it's kind of a separate thing from what we're doing from all of the operations, and
It's
so-
not, in the JPA, it's not. That's a
understand
very
that.
distinct, and there's a reason why we did it that way, and no offense to the representatives from Half Moon Bay, this is a constant request, but in compliance with the JPA agreement and keeping in mind the lawsuit, SAM sees all of those costs as operations and maintenance, and that's why it's built in that way.
Serious flaw.
Well,
I understand that. I still thank you, and I appreciate seeing this. It was helpful. And then, Is it possible if we want to see backup for any particular line item? If we, for example, wanted to know more detail on professional services, is there, a report that would be easy for us to see that just shows how the $749,000 breaks out?
As far as the detail of it, you
Yeah.
could look at, since much of it is what's already being spent this year, I mean, we don't, aside
I
from.
mean, where is that? I haven't been able to.
Well, it's not part of the budget, because the budget's a plan.
I know, but
But
the
the
budget just has a total line, it doesn't have any,
You're talking about the assumptions behind the
yeah, the assumptions
budgeted
behind
amounts.
the budgeted
Well,
amounts.
and the following, the narratives for each of the divisions, it gives you what types of services are
But
in
those
there.
are just like one or two lines generally, right?
Well, the document would be, I mean, most of the managers have requested this be a 3-page document.
No, I'm not saying I necessarily want it, I'm just asking if it's available. If
Yes,
one
it
were to
is.
say, I'd like to see exactly what these professional services we're paying for $750,000. Could I ask for that level of detail if I wanted to see it?
I don't have a report that would, I could just put out and say, this is what is in each of those. But if you look,
So how do you come up with that number, just based on the total from last year, or?
well, I'm looking at, are we going to be repeating the costs next year based on the types of things we did this
So
year?
you could
She starts with the base budget, she starts with the base budget, and then
Right, but it's a dollar,
estimates,
it's
yeah.
not necessarily so-and-so for it's, I don't have it at that level of detail, but.
So it doesn't exist. Okay, well, that was my question.
But,
But-
Half Moon Bay does a budget where we, break out our various funds, and we identify the components of those funds, and any extraordinary things we expect to be paying for in the new year that might be augmenting the base budget.
Mhm.
So there usually is some sort of narrative in our budget about, for
Mhm.
each fund, other than the general fund.
And
That
that
can be
level
done.
is in here, anything that's unusual is in here. For example,
But if you're new and you're looking at $750,000 in professional services, just to know, like, what are the main components of that?
well, and that's what I was trying to get to is I don't have it for next year, meaning I'm looking at the dollar amount and assuming that in general, we're going to be needing the same types of services,
Mhm.
whether we go out for bid or RFP and it is the same vendor. I anticipate that we are going to need legal services, I anticipate we're gonna need IT support services. But if you wanna see how it's being spent, you can look at on the SAM website, there is the transparency portal. And if you go to the portal, you can click on that line item and it'll tell you what's been spent.
Okay.
That's what I was trying to get to is for this year, it'll tell you and explain to you exactly what's being spent out of each of these line items. The assumption is, are we going to continue to need those for next year? Anywhere where it's something different, either more or less, I've noted in here.
Okay, that's really helpful, thank you.
So, as far as the changes, this does not include the contract services, obviously that's a separate discussion. This is just what we call the JPA function of SAM. And yes, it's continued to increase, but as I've explained in the past, that's primarily because we're starting to see system degradation and have been for several years, and we've got to start addressing that. We have been, I don't wanna say put on notice, but we've had numerous discussions with the regional board that they need to see a commitment to replacing our infrastructure, both the components that have failed and a plan for those they anticipate to fail in the near future, because we don't wanna have a revisit of what we experienced in 2017. And so we need to make sure that we are identifying those projects and funding them, not just identifying them, but funding them and actually working through those
Isn't that
projects.
what a master plan would do?
Yes, and that's what we've done with the 5 and 20 year, and now we need to sort of take it to the next level of degree of detail and dollar value. But we also have to have a plan behind that for funding it, which Sam doesn't do that because that comes from the member agencies. And so that's the next step in the process. And making sure that we are demonstrating to the regional board that we aren't going to continue to look at our infrastructure as putting out fires, so to speak.
There is one line in here that go ahead.
Go ahead, you started.
Just a line in here where it says all budgeted positions will be filled if vacant. I'm not sure I understand that. If a vacancy comes up, isn't that a time when the board should say, well, do we really need that position? Do we need a different position? Do we wanna change the scope of the position before we go ahead and just fill it?
Well, in the past, the board's direction is that once a position is budgeted and funded and there's somebody in it, that's the general manager's responsibility to bring it forward if there is something that needs to be changed at the time of the vacancy. But if it's funded and it's authorized, then it's the general manager's discretion to fill it or not fill it. I'm looking at if somebody were to retire in the middle of the year, the expectation isn't that I would leave it vacant. The expectation is that I would fill it. Or if, for example, with the operator in training, if the person were to leave and take a job somewhere else, that the expectation is not that I'm going to downsize by that staffing position, is that it was needed and it's still needed, and so therefore I'm going to fill it. And then at the budget time, we would have that discussion, but at least for the purposes of the budget process, the assumption is if a position becomes vacant during the year, we're going to fill it in some fashion.
I'd still like to see some oversight by the board over filling vacant positions. Check in during a meeting, something's become vacant.
Oh, I always
Here's
do
the-
that. I always do that. I always bring that up to the board and,
But I think before an RFP goes out would be good.
well, we wouldn't be doing an RFP typically, you mean
For
for,
recruitment, is what I'm saying.
well, that would definitely be a new process. So I think that would fall under what previously had been part of the board operations committee discussions, because it's the committee that's more or less acted as the personnel board. So, I mean,
Well, then I would bring it to the operations committee before, nobody wants to be surprised by a recruitment, so we want to engage at least a subset of the board in taking a look at that before a recruitment is commenced, I think.
is there a
That would be my
particular reason? I mean, this is new, so I'm just wondering if there's a particular reason, is it,
You wouldn't wanna wait for board approval, just an information item that, because if there's a position that suddenly becomes vacant, there may be some urgency to fill it. And
It's mainly, at least initially, a check-in with the operations committee or the chair. This position is vacant, it's becoming vacant. I think we should have a little bit of, a control point on that.
It was my understanding that the board, once we've approved a budget and filled positions, that that's our control point, and that general manager is in charge of staff and the board is in charge of certain consultants and the general manager. So I think us getting involved in, as I hear you asking, and so please correct me, but having us get involved in staff level kinds of staffing decisions is not necessarily appropriate for the board.
Well, I certainly don't want to tell her who to hire. I don't
That's,
mean to
that's, I didn't
engage
think
in the
so.
employment process. I'm talking about, to me, it's sort of a policy matter of, okay, position's open, what do we do? I get that it's budgeted, but it's just a chance to review by the board or a subset of the board.
I think it would be better if, we've had that personnel study and we've been discussing staffing levels off and on for the last year, and,
That's fine, it looks like there's no support for it, so I can let go of it, but I thought I was there.
but I think being told what's going on is entirely necessary. And so that part, I think, for our future decision-making is critically important.
Yeah, I certainly don't wanna have somebody call me up and say, hey, I saw a recruitment from Sam, I don't know about it, so.
Right.
Well, and so far, at least since I've been here, it's been in my weekly reports whenever there's been an issue, or if there's been an announcement, I send out an email to the board saying, we've had someone announce that they're leaving, and I will be recruiting for the position. So certainly, from an informational standpoint, I would never wanna leave the board in the dark on that, and I would continue to inform the board. And we can also make sure that it's in our monthly manager's report, just so that it's transparent. I would always want
Great.
to do that.
That sounds good.
Okay,
I otherwise have no,
any other
Issues at
discussion
this
on the
point.
budget?
Well, I think it's going to be a hit. I appreciate smoothing out the $2.5 million, because we're going to have to go out for a study and rate study and all of that stuff. The 4% COLA is, what you're doing is taking an average from 7% utilities, which is $520,000, and the, other increases, and so that's how you got to 4%.
No, what I did is for those where I didn't know what an increase would be, I put in a placeholder for a 4%, because that's approximately where the CPI has been hovering. For some of the expenses, we already know. I mean, CCWD tells everyone what the water rate's going to be, and we have a general idea. PG&E has told us, what our rate changes are going to be. It's for the unknown things where we don't have a rate or a fee announcement, but the assumption is that as costs go up, vendors are going to pass that cost on and put in a 4%, anticipating that we're probably going to see something near CPI.
yeah, we're assuming 2.5 to 3.
So next year, we won't be looking at wages, that makes more sense to me. Next year, wages won't be going up 22% and benefits won't be going up 10%. And engineering, that's budget percentage, so, but we're going to be looking at a flattening out of some of these items.
I don't have my crystal ball, but I anticipate that we will continue to see increases for some of those costs because of things like PERS, the PERS rates. The reason why you're seeing us more than just a COLA type of increase in staffing is because of the additional position, the request for the additional position.
Right.
For the other costs, some of it is because of additional work that needs to be done. It gets back to trying to plan to do things rather than being caught in an emergency with some of the smaller in-house projects. And it's also for things like utilities that we've seen an increase significant to our normal operations and for various reasons. And unfortunately, we're beholden to those utilities just like people are beholden to us for our costs. We have to pay those costs. So, but
We can't do it.
I would love to tell CCWD, I reject your rate increase. But part of it is just the cost of operations and doing it properly is becoming more expensive. And we don't want to do anything that could potentially jeopardize our permit. And so we want to make sure that we're reflecting that, and also to hear that we don't like to have mid-year budget adjustments because we didn't sufficiently planned. And so we're trying to meet all of those expectations, but that means that unfortunately, we're building it into the budget because we've seen, at least for the last 2 years, that those additional costs have come true.
Yeah, no, that's one of the quandaries that you're in when you're doing a budget, is if you do it too tight and things hit you, then you get accused of one kind of incompetence, and if you try and plan ahead for those things, you get accused of
Inflating the budget.
inflating the budget, so.
It's a lovely
damned if you do
dance.
and damned if you don't, yes.
Yes, and as far as what we've experienced in the last couple of years, we would like to be ahead of those things rather than behind them. And part of that is making sure that we have sufficient funding to address the items that we know of and can reasonably anticipate.
I just have one question, just curious, I'm not actually, chemicals, 37% increase. Is
Well,
that
as-
based on, I know you've said this is, I mean, that's the same amount of chemicals, you're not expecting to use more, anything appreciably more, it's just the prices that are going up that much.
No, the prices are not going up that much. We are using that much more in chemicals.
And
So-
why is that? Just,
I will defer to my operator to explain why our chemical use could
You're such an
fluctuate from
operator.
year to year.
A lot of it's dependent on flow, average dry weather flow, hypochlorite, for example, we average about 200 gallons a day, 225 roughly. These past few days, when we had excessive amounts of rain, not excessive, I guess it depends on where you live exactly. what you live
it's
in.
excessive.
Let's define.
But we
I'll
use
call it
like
excessive.
hypochlorite, 80 cents a gallon, right? We went from 200 gallons a day to 800 gallons a day. So, it doesn't take a lot of math to figure that out. If you do that multiple times, it's gonna add up in a hurry. I think the ferric chloride went up quite a bit too, and that is a very specific supplier that supplies that particular product. And that one we had a pretty sharp increase, and we are very much at the mercy of what they're going to do, unless we wanna look into a different type of chemical product. But if we go into a different type of chemical product, obviously, we're gonna have to change the tankage and possibly pumps containing possible contamination, whatever we might have, maybe not. But I just don't know if another chemical is gonna be more expensive or less expensive. I mean, there's so many contributing factors, I don't know. How much detail do you want me to get into?
No, I just was curious, it's a big jump, and I wanted to know if it was because you were using more, or because the prices really have gone up that much. I actually didn't have an agenda, I was just, that seems like a fixed item, and a 37% increase in 1 year just seems like a lot.
And it's based on use. We did have an increase in price for part of the consortium, and each year we get notified what that increase is, and it's, a lot of it's driven by delivery costs. Because before the consortium existed, each agency that couldn't buy in bulk was really getting hammered with the cost. So the consortium in the Bay Area came together and tried to negotiate as a whole. That was done some years ago. I brought that over here when I came here. It didn't take a lot to join the consortium. It has reduced our cost. The problem is that doesn't do anything for the consumption portion of it. And as we see those fluctuations, we have no choice, we have to meet our permit. So, even if the cost was static, the fluctuation in use would dictate potentially an increase.
So at least you're buying cooperatively.
Yes.
So we know that, we're assuming a better than market price
Yes.
there.
It was
So,
approximately
yeah.
20% savings when we joined the consortium, just from joining the consortium. But the use factor in which of those chemicals, that's really dependent upon what's the process that's going on at the plant and what we're seeing here.
And seasonally,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So that, unfortunately, what I had budgeted for this year and had hoped to see this year, it's been more so because we've had a greater consumption in some of our chemicals. And so I didn't want to be caught short next year. I wanted to assume that next year would be much like this year. And so I'm trying to,
Well, it sounds like this year, we're using a lot of chemicals.
Was El Nino light?
Yeah,
Yeah, it is,
That's how it was
because
described
last year was
So
not
people were probably
much.
flushing more too, right? Because
Yeah.
they weren't
But
concerned.
watching-
flushable white. So.
Watching the rain gauge, we got 42 inches of rain year before last.
yeah,
Yeah,
So,
so February alone, we were average, 10-year average based on US climate weather data, 5.02 inches, I believe, in this year, Half Moon Bay 7.2. So 10-year average, we were 2 inches, just for February.
and it came in a very short period of time.
Right,
Certainly
like
did.
2 weeks, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so we definitely see and feel the impact of that on our processes.
Thank you.
Other discussion? Okay, you don't need anything from us.
No,
on
I
this.
do.
You do? You need
Yes.
what?
Direction.
Well, no, not direction. We are at
We're
the
asking you
point,
to submit the budget.
yeah,
To the
to
agencies.
authorize me that this budget is okay to submit to the member agencies as it is for their consideration.
Okay, can I have a motion?
I move that we authorize the general manager to submit the budget to the draft budget to the member agencies for approval.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we are moving on to manager's report.
Did we have anything left over from last week, or last meeting that we needed to bring up?
Okay, attorney's report?
Well, I thought I would tell you, since we don't have a closed session on this, and it's not highly confidential anyway, the Granada Community Services District issued a notice of determination based on the environmental work done for the wet weather storage facility, which is a little incremental step moving towards getting that project going. They also approved, subject to certain conditions, the issuance of an easement. And I had discussed with Beverly whether we should bring that easement to this board, but Granada had previously indicated they wanted to see what the Coastal Commission did first, just in case there were some more conditions or something like that. So we said, we'll just wait for that.
That's the Burnham strip?
The Burnham Strip, yes.
Okay.
So,
I
that was-
should add that Sacramento is doing 2 huge projects, one under McKinley Park, and the other, I have forgotten the location of, which are pretty much the same as the Burnham Strip, except we're talking about 10 million gallons for wet weather overflow. There was a lawsuit about the one going under McKinley Park, and it was dismissed. It was found that it was an appropriate project. So we led the way with that kind of project when we put the initial Burnham Strip project in. Santa Cruz is doing projects like this now, and then I saw several in Sacramento
And Pacifica.
and Pacifica, yeah.
Are we allowed to get royalties from this?
I wish.
Brilliant ideas.
Royalties.
Yeah.
Okay, director's reports. Topics for future agenda board consideration.
I'd like to see that report on the public comment from the last meeting, in addition to the verbatim for the minutes.
Oh, yes.
I'd like to see that followed up on.
Yes. That was on that the issue with regards to the contract collection services. And I will also report that the Half Moon Bay City Manager and I have had a conversation, and we're scheduling a meeting where we can sit down and get some additional information, resolve some issues. So I'd like to present my report after we have that discussion, so I can add in anything that needs to be added.
And we are going, if the contract is changed, it will come to the board?
Well, it would have to.
Okay.
And as far as the contract collection services, I received a very brief email from Montera and Granada that it's status quo. So obviously I received that at the very end of last week, so not sufficient time to put something together for tonight. But obviously to be compliant with that contract language, I will be bringing something on at the March 25th meeting for consideration.
Those contracts say March 31st.
Yeah.
Submit a budget.
Yeah, so I just was notified in brief. So I'll put that together.
Thank you.
Public comment, oral communication. Is there any? None. Okay, we will convene in closed session then.